The weather outside is frightful, but this couch is so delightful. Today, we're going to begin our series on medieval arms and armor by discussing the arming sword. Hello, and thanks for tuning in. This is Lauren, and today we're going to be talking about that knightly weapon, the arming sword. Of course, it's not just for knights. It could be for men-at-arms, squires, ladies defending castles, archers, and even the middle class who are traveling between towns. A standard single-handed sword, pommel, nice leather grip, straight crossguard, a blade for cutting and thrusting. Now this is a training sword, so it is not sharp, and it does have a rolled tip for safety reasons. It is made by Kvetun in Russia, Kvetun. It's a really nice sword. I've had it for about 7-8 months now. Haven't really had a chance to use it because, of course, this is the year 2020 as of recording. And we're not allowed to really do a lot of sparring and fighting with swords. But today, what I really want to do is just go over the basics of this sword, explain to you the parts of the sword, and a little bit about how it works. So we start with the pommel. Now this is a standard classic medieval wheel or disc pommel. Earlier pommels might have lobes or be a Brazil nut, looking all the way back to Saxon and Viking times through the Norman. Later examples, they might be called stent stopper or fishtail, very different shapes to them, but this is what people normally see, and so it's a good example. And a pommel is very important because this is the part that holds everything together. The pommel goes on the back of the sword, and the blade, the part called the tang, which goes through the handle, is peened. So everything is assembled, it's nice, it's tight, and there's nothing loose, rattling, nothing to throw off your cut when you're going to swing that sword. Also, helps you have good hand position. You're supposed to watch your opponent. You're not supposed to look down, oh, how's my hand on my sword? You've just been struck by your opponent. Oh, dear. So you don't want that. So you can feel where your hand is. You can have a hammer grip. You can have a handshake grip. You can change how you're holding the sword for different actions without having to look at it. You can feel where your hand is. Of course, a pommel also helps with the balance of a sword. A sword should balance close to the guard. This is what makes a sword maneuverable, fast, nimble, a finesse weapon. And of course, pommel, you can strike with a pommel. You can hit someone in the face with it. That is an acceptable move when you're sparring against someone if you're wearing all of the proper protection. Fencing mask, jacket, mitts, everything. Okay, so that's the pommel. Then we talk about the handle or grip. I prefer leather covered, but you could have cord wrapped, wire wrapped. I don't like wire wrapped, but you may love it. Looks pretty, but I prefer a nice leather grip on the sword. Now, I tend to keep my hand a little bit below the crossguard. That makes it easy to maneuver. It means that impact on the guard doesn't transfer into my hand. If my hand were up on the guard and hit, the energy goes right into it. So, leave it a little bit here. Also makes it easier to control and maneuver the sword. I'm not likely to dig the guard into my arm. Here I am, my thumb is right up against the guard. I'm hitting. If I move my hand down a bit, I'll probably miss. I'm not digging into my arm. But we can talk about the crossguard because that's also protecting my hand as I'm holding the sword. The sword blade comes down, angles away from my hand. Hand is put up. Oops, could cut into my hand. So a little bit of space is good. But the crossguard really develops into the High Middle Ages as the beginning of hand protection. If we look at Renaissance and early modern swords, we're going to see fancy cages and shells and cups. We're going to see a lot of different features. We'll even have little finger rings and a lot of more hand defense. But in our classic medieval sword, we have quillons. That's what we call the end parts of the crossguard. So it stretches out, helps protect the hand. And you'll probably have a shield or a buckler, a small round shield, which we'll talk about in another video. You'll probably have that in the other hand to help with protection, so you don't need it to have a lot of work. Plus, you're trying to keep the sword light so that it's maneuverable. The more metal you add, the heavier the sword is, and only if you have a thin, maneuverable blade would that help. Switch swords for a second, I'll show you why. Here is more of a 12th to 13th century sword with a very different type of blade. I do like this sword. This is made by Dark Sword Armory in Canada. Yay, Canada. Same kind of pommel, same kind of guard, same kind of grip, but that blade isn't so thin towards the end. It's a thicker blade. This is more of a cutting sword. High medieval sword. More knightly. More stereotypical 12th to 13th century type of sword. Now, when we have this, the first thing I want to talk about as we move on to the blade is this part here. It's called the fuller. What does a fuller do? No, not fuller as in the sense of bleaching things. Not the profession. The part of the sword. The part of the sword called the fuller makes this blade lighter while maintaining strength. That's it. Someone's going to call it a blood groove and think that they're all edgy and cool, and it's not a thing. It's just someone's explanation based on no information whatsoever. So, swords have fullers. They make the blade lighter and stronger. Swords shouldn't be heavy. 1 to 1.5 kilograms at most. So we're talking about 2.2 to 3 pounds. That's an ideal weight for a sword. You shouldn't have more than 3 pounds. And I don't like a 3-pound sword. This one does get a little bit heavy, but I've used it for teaching some classes on sword and buckler. Holds up really well. A lot of fun. Looks good. Classic sword. Not as much for thrusting. More for cutting. Anyway, goodbye sword. Back to our original. When we have a blade, we divide it into different sections when we're talking about its use. Now, this isn't structural. The blade is the blade. It's symmetrical. It has 2 edges in a classic type of arming sword. This one thinner towards the tip because it would be for cutting and thrusting. But we talk about terms of sword as strong and weak. What do we mean by strong and weak? This is the strong. This is the weak. Doesn't mean that the metal is stronger or weaker in any of these parts. What it means is that I have strong control, I have weak control. So the further up I am on the blade, the closer I am to the tip, the weaker my control over an opponent's sword is. So if the swords come in and we're bound and I am here, I am close to my hand, I am strong, I can push, I can maneuver. If I am close to the tip of the sword, I am weak. I can't push so much. I have more leverage the closer I am to my hand. So we refer to this as the strong, the mid, and up here, the weak. Kind of goes off the camera a little bit, doesn't it? Oh well. But the weak is where we hit with the sword. If we hold the sword and we let it vibrate, this is the part of the sword that vibrates the least on impact. And so the weak part of the sword is what does the actual cutting or the thrusting. The strong part is best for our defense. We also talk about edges. We have 2 edges on this sword. They are symmetrical, but we refer to one as the true or the long edge, and we refer to the other as the false or the short edge. But they're the same. They look the same. They're not longer or shorter. They're the same length. I know. But it's not about structure. It's about use. So when we have edges and we give them different names, we're talking about how we would use them in a fight. So if this, in German terms, the long edge, that is our longer cut. We have longer reach. We can deliver more power. It might take a 1/10 or 2/10 of a second longer to strike with that edge, but that is optimal for our attack, the long edge. And how do we know that it's the long edge? Because that's the side with the knuckles. The knuckles go with the long edge. The short edge goes with the wrist side. So when I grab a sword, long edge is always knuckles, short edge, wrist. If I turn the sword, now that's the long edge. Oh, now that's the long edge. Oh, no, that's the long edge. Oh. So it doesn't matter about the actual sword. It's terminology for use. Long edge, long, powerful cut. Short edge, quick, less powerful cut. You can also call it the front and the back edge. But that's more for early modern terms for fencing. Those are the parts of the sword, and it gives you a little bit of idea of how it's used. It's light, it's nimble, maneuverable, lots of finesse in its use. Cut, thrust, smack with the pommel, jab with the crossguard, changing your hand positions. That's a sword. it is something that if you are a writer or making video games, if you have any kind of medieval stuff, you should have a single-handed sword or an arming sword, or even just calling it a sword. Those are the basics of how you hold it and how you refer to it and all its parts. It's not a big sharpened crowbar. It's not going to tire yourself out. It is all about the finesse of using it. But we'll talk about other swords and other armaments in other videos. For today, I would just like to say thank you very much for tuning in. Remember to like the video if you liked it. If you didn't like it, don't do anything. You don't have to do anything at all. But if you liked it, click that like button. Remember to subscribe. You can hit the notification bell if you want to know when the next video is up. And I've been Lauren. You've been the audience. And thank you very much for watching All About the Arming Sword.